Belohun, son of Osmic, was the king of Karak for a rather long time. His father Osmic had simply named himself king after making an absolutely disgusting amount of money. His son Belohun had had more brothers, but they had all mysteriously declined the throne. So Belohun reigned Karak for over 20 years, and he was quite old by now. Old and annoying, as he insisted that a loud bell be rung every day at noon and midnight, and so time simply muddled on reasonably peacefully. Then one day, Litanade, also known as Coral, graced his kingdom with her presence once again, to Belohun's distaste, because Litanade was aiding women by creating contraceptive potions for them, and if they were already pregnant and didn't want to be, she helped them with abortions. Belohun disagreed with the matter entirely, of course. He was of the opinion that women were only there to become pregnant, at home, where she belongs, because that will keep her from cheating on her husband, and men were only allowed to work and make money for their king, not themselves, just their king. And if they had to worry about their wives cheating all the time, then they wouldn't work nearly as much as they could. Lita, knowing full well that Belohun's kingdom had been a terribly unimportant one for a while now, refrained from noting this in his face. Instead, she told him subtly, through snide remarks and, no doubt, well-meant advice. Coral's advice enraged Belohun's son, Xander, who told her that kings don't need advice, kings command, only to be blown away immediately by his father, announcing that he was taking a new wife, a girl of 17 years old. Belohun's other son, Egmont, couldn't quite hide his surprise and disdain at this news, especially when Belohun next mentioned that he was marrying this woman for reasons of succession. Not strange, of course, because Belohun already had 6 sons and 8 daughters, that they knew of, anyway. Regardless, Belohun brought up his new wife because he wanted to forbid Coral from giving her any contraceptives, something Lita agreed to in order to keep the peace. But this wasn't going to fly for too long, of course. Belohun's sons wanted the throne. One of them, Egmont, had a rather cunning plan in mind indeed. First, he pretended to be Xander while he talked to the Witcher as he tried to convince him every which way to kill his father and all of his brothers, only to reveal who he really was after Geralt kept refusing. He had just wanted to test the Witcher, he said. What he really wanted was for Geralt to protect his father from assassination attempts, and that Geralt could agree to somewhat. What Geralt didn't know was that this was still all about an assassination attempt. No, not preventing one, but causing one. At the wedding feast, Egmont planned to keep Dandelion hostage in order to force Geralt to then kill Belohun himself. He just needed to make sure Geralt would be around for the wedding, and this bodyguard contract would do nicely. Mind you, it wouldn't be a terrible thing for Belohun to die a little sooner than expected. He was a rather terrible person in general, even outside of politics. Whenever Belohun spots a new woman he wants to bed, his current wife mysteriously dies, and he would not stop having children with these new ladies. 4 of his sons were legally in line to the throne, but every single one of his sons and daughters, even the bastards, held either high positions within the government or commerce and industry, or, if daughters, their husbands did. In order of seniority, there was the firstborn, Viraxis, whose name was forbidden to mention at court, because after a fight with Belohun, he had disappeared without a trace. The second is Elmer, a deranged drunk kept under lock and key, which is supposed to be a state secret, but absolutely wasn't. And then there's Egmont and Xander. They detest each other, and Belohun exploited that happily. Meanwhile, Belohun boasted about his marriage being the most important thing to the world since ever, even though Karak was an absolutely tiny kingdom. Belohun still believed that he was the center of the world, which also meant that he pulled out all the stops for his wedding. It was a truly ridiculously large feast, plundering the coffers of the kingdom to make it happen, no doubt. Belohun arrived with at his side a young blonde in a veil, Ildiko Breckel. Ildiko had at one point studied at the sorceress school Aretuza, but had been thrown out in her 3rd year for petty theft. However, as a sorceress, it was unlikely that she could have any children at all. She also wasn't really 17 years old. She was at least 25. Not to mention that she hated Coral. Coral, who warned Geralt that Ildiko likely had ulterior motives in coming here today, especially as the Acherontia, a ship flying black sails, had entered the harbor. A ship well known to appear when big things happened, like a coup. Geralt hurried back into the palace to find Dandelion, who was apparently summoned to perform for the royal couple, only to be met, eventually, by King Belohun himself, who loudly proclaimed that something was off about Geralt because he had been accused of a crime he did not commit. When the suspicious ship in the harbor was brought up, Belohun merely scoffed, believing that this whole thing was a setup by Prince Egmont. So, he led Geralt into the throne room, where his 2 sons were seated also, to make fun of them. As it turned out, Belohun already knew that both his sons had intended to betray him. He'd placed agents among their friends and put the screws on them. The sons had not paid for the Acherontia and its mercenaries to sail into the harbor. Belohun had. Tomorrow, his sons would board the ship and not be allowed off until a while into Nilfgaard. They were exiled. His sons were outraged, of course, but Egmont still somehow seemed unimpressed altogether. Obviously, because he had known this would happen, and his plan would work out either way. He warned Belohun that he was a fool, and as Belohun orders Geralt to leave the room after this little presentation, Geralt runs into 3 people who seemed oddly in tune, and Geralt realized what was about to happen. He was right. He was led to the chamber where Dandelion sat, accompanied by a man holding a knife to his throat. The coup had begun. Geralt, of course, disagreed, and killed the conspirators in the room with ease. Afterwards, they certainly attempted to make Belohun aware of what had happened, but they were too late. They couldn't get near the king, and anyway, he was already dead. After loudly proclaiming that Ildiko's child would inherit the throne unless he changed his mind and found a younger, prettier model, the necklace he'd put on choked him to death. The necklace gifted to him by Ildiko. The necklace so obviously enchanted. It didn't take long after they pronounced the king dead for several men to enter the room, the crew of the Acherontia. They ordered the gathered company to leave for the throne room by order of the king, the new king. In the throne room, they found a dark-haired, dark-eyed man with a prominent nose sitting on the throne. Viraxis, Belohun's firstborn son, with at his side Ildiko Breckle. Unbeknownst to everyone, they had been a couple all along, and they'd planned this out from the very start. They even got Belohun to invite them into his harbor. Viraxis had assumed kingship, of course, still keeping the exile of his brothers intact. He also absolutely intended to still marry Ildiko. Unfortunately for Coral, Ildiko still held a grudge against her, and so, as soon as Viraxis was crowned, several royal edicts were issued, most of them causing Coral to lose her land, possessions, and rights within his kingdom. In fact, all mages did, which was a little awkward given that it was mages who funded Viraxis' return to Karak in the first place. Somehow, I doubt Karak will do well for very long without any access to magic, coupled with extremely high customs and port fees. Then again, that's probably for the best. I'm sure you're not surprised, but we're not doing skits at the end cards today either. I am so sorry. My Patreons are getting titles today. I hope you appreciate those too. Walguy the Illustrious, Robertson the Enlightened, Lochmoin the Fierce, MJ Coolsta the Impressive, Septic the Catist, Mike Zweers the Unrelenting, Adrian Packel the Impeccable, Ray the Fortuitous, Freeman the Wise,